Montana Territory, 1883. A woman steps down from a dusty stagecoach into the golden light of a fading afternoon, her gloved hand clutching a letter bearing a man's careful signature. Her eyes search the small gathering of townsfolk, looking for the face that matches the portrait she carries, seeking the future she has traveled 2,000 miles to claim. But destiny has other plans, and what awaits her will test the limits of courage and reveal that sometimes our greatest strengths emerge only when everything familiar has turned to ash. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late June sun beat down mercilessly on Liberty Creek as the twice-weekly stagecoach from Helena rumbled to a stop outside the Frontier Hotel. Dust billowed around the wheels, momentarily obscuring the weathered sign that announced the town's population of 312 souls, though that count seemed optimistic to anyone who had actually walked its single main street. Abigail Thornton pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, trying to filter the dust that seemed determined to coat her throat. 27 years old, with chestnut hair and eyes the color of autumn leaves, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied her inner turmoil. The journey from Philadelphia had taken 12 days of constant motion, each mile carrying her farther from the life she'd known and closer to an uncertain future. Liberty Creek, announced the driver, a leathery man named Silas, who had maintained a granite silence for most of the final day's journey. "End of the line for you, ma'am." Abigail smoothed the wrinkles from her traveling dress, a practical navy, wool that had once been fashionable in Philadelphia, but now seemed as out of place as she felt. Inside her beaded reticule lay her most precious possessions, a small leather portfolio containing the deed to her father's business, 3 bank drafts totaling over $30,000, and a delicate gold locket containing miniature portraits of her parents. None of the curious onlookers knew that the unassuming woman stepping down from the coach carried a fortune that could purchase half the businesses in Liberty Creek. That secret was hers alone, and she intended to keep it that way until she was certain of her new circumstances. "Mr. Thomas Fletcher?" she asked the driver, scanning the small crowd that had gathered to witness the stagecoach's arrival. Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Don't know no Fletcher. Check with Sheriff Hayes or maybe Widow Parker at the General Store. They keep tabs on most folks hereabouts." A flicker of unease passed through Abigail, but she quickly suppressed it. After 18 months of correspondence, she had traveled across the country to meet Thomas Fletcher, whose letters had painted a picture of a modest but thriving horse ranch 5 miles outside of Liberty Creek. His last letter had explicitly stated he would meet her at the stagecoach on this day. Her trunk and 2 valises were unloaded from the roof of the coach, and then the driver was climbing back to his seat, eager to reach the next town before nightfall. Within moments, the stagecoach was disappearing around the bend, leaving Abigail standing alone with her possessions. "Ma'am, you need assistance?" A boy of perhaps 12 approached, eyeing her luggage with entrepreneurial interest. "Yes, thank you. Is there somewhere I might wait while my trunk is delivered to the Fletcher Ranch?" She reached into her purse, extracting a nickel that brought a gap-toothed smile to the boy's face. "Fletcher Ranch?" The boy's brow furrowed. "Don't know." About Fletcher Ranch, unease blossomed into concern. "Mr. Thomas Fletcher, he raises horses, about 5 miles east of town according to his letters." The boy shook his head. "Only horse ranch east of here belongs to old man Pearson, and he died last winter. Place burned down in April. Lightning strike, they said." Abigail felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "There must be some mistake. I've been corresponding with Mr. Fletcher for over a year. He described his property in detail." "You could ask Sheriff Hayes." the boy suggested, already lifting one of her valises. "He knows everybody for 20 miles. The sheriff's office was a square wooden building with a freshly painted sign and windows clean enough to suggest its occupant took pride in appearances. Inside, Sheriff Daniel Hayes looked up from his desk, setting aside a stack of wanted posters as Abigail entered. "Something I can help you with, ma'am?" he asked, rising to his feet. "I hope so, Sheriff. I'm looking for Thomas Fletcher. I was to meet him today upon my arrival." The sheriff's expression shifted subtly. "And you are?" "Abigail Thornton. Mr. Fletcher and I have been corresponding for 18 months. I've come from Philadelphia to—" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "To be his wife." Hayes removed his hat, a gesture that immediately confirmed her growing fears. "Miss Thornton, I'm afraid there's no Thomas Fletcher in Liberty Creek or the surrounding county. Not now, and not in the 5 years I've served as sheriff." The words struck Abigail with physical force. "That's impossible. I have his letters." She opened her reticule with trembling fingers, withdrawing a packet of 26 letters, each bearing the same precise handwriting. "Thomas Fletcher, Pine Ridge Ranch, Liberty Creek, Montana Territory." Hayes examined the letters, his frown deepening. "The handwriting is educated, I'll give you that. But I'm sorry to say, you've been deceived, ma'am." "But why would anyone—" Abigail couldn't complete the question. The sheriff sighed. "It happens more than folks talk about. Some men write to Eastern women, spinning tales about prosperous ranches and comfortable lives. They take whatever money the women send for travel expenses, maybe keep up the correspondence long enough to request more funds for wedding preparations, then disappear." Abigail sank into a chair, her mind racing. She had been careful, so careful. She had insisted on corresponding for a full year before agreeing to travel west. Fletcher's letters had been consistent, detailed, and seemingly sincere. He had never directly asked for money, though she had sent funds to cover the wedding preparations 3 months ago. "Was there a Pearson ranch that burned?" she asked finally. "Yes, ma'am. Jacob Pearson's place, about 5 miles east. He died. In February, influenza took him. Place sat empty until a lightning strike burned the main house in April. Land's in probate now, waiting on some distant nephew from Minnesota." "I see." Abigail's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Miss Thornton, the Frontier Hotel has clean rooms at reasonable rates. I'd suggest you take a day or two to consider your options before the next eastbound stage on Thursday." The implication was clear. Return to Philadelphia. Admit defeat. Accept that she had been duped by a confidence man who had preyed on her. A vulnerability. "Thank you, Sheriff, I'll consider it." Her voice was steady, belying the turmoil within. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, painting Liberty Creek in golden hues that couldn't disguise its roughness. The town consisted of a general store, the hotel, 2 saloons, a blacksmith shop, a small church, and a scattering of houses and businesses. Nothing like Philadelphia, with its cobblestone streets and gaslit avenues. Abigail made her way to the Frontier Hotel, arranging for a room and the storage of her trunk. $2 secured her a small but clean chamber with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the town's main street. Once alone, she finally allowed herself to absorb the magnitude of her situation. Thomas Fletcher didn't exist. The ranch he had described in such loving detail was fictional. The 18 months of correspondence, the plans, the hopes, all built on falsehood. Half of her inheritance was spent on the journey west, and now she was stranded in a frontier town where she knew no one. She unfolded Fletcher's last letter, reading it again by the fading light. "My dearest Abigail, as I write this, spring has finally come to Pine Ridge Ranch. The meadows are carpeted in wildflowers, and the foals born last month have begun to find their legs. I've completed the improvements to the main house, including the bookshelf-lined study I promised you. The bedroom faces east, as you requested, to catch the morning light you so cherish. I count the days until June 18th, when I will finally meet you at the stagecoach. Look for a man in a brown hat with a silver band. I'll be the one with the most genuine smile, as I'll finally be welcoming home the woman whose letters have brought such joy to my solitary life. Until then, I remain faithfully yours, Thomas. The details were so specific, so seemingly heartfelt. How could someone fabricate such sincerity? And more practically, what was she to do now? Return to Philadelphia was the obvious answer, but the thought filled her with dread. She had sold her father's modest house, settled his affairs after his death, and departed with no intention of returning. Philadelphia held nothing but painful memories of her father's final illness and the relentless pressure from his business partner, Victor Caldwell, who had made it clear that marrying him was her only path to financial security. What Victor didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jonathan Thornton had secretly signed over his flourishing textiles business to his daughter before his death. The business that Victor assumed would come to him through marriage was legally Abigail's, along with the substantial funds her father had withdrawn from the bank in his final weeks. "I won't have him forcing your hand through financial necessity," her father had whispered from his deathbed. "This gives you freedom to choose." Abigail had chosen freedom in the West, a fresh start with a man who seemed to value her mind as well as her potential as a wife. Now that dream had evaporated like morning mist. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was the hotel proprietor's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Martha Wilson. "Thought you might like some supper, Miss Thornton. We serve meals downstairs, but I figured you might prefer privacy after your long journey." "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." Abigail accepted the tray of simple but appetizing food: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and a slice of apple pie. Martha lingered in the doorway. "Sheriff Hayes mentioned your situation. I'm real sorry about that. Some men ain't got the decency God gave a rattlesnake." "It seems not." Abigail managed a small smile. "If you're thinking of heading back east, stage fare's $15 to Helena. Then there's the train from there. $15. A substantial sum, though well within her means. But returning meant facing Victor Caldwell, meant admitting defeat, meant surrendering the independence she had fought so hard to secure. "And if I weren't heading east?" Abigail asked carefully. Martha considered this. "Well, Liberty Creek's growing. We get the mining trade from up north, ranches to the east and south. Town needs all sorts of services. Seamstress maybe, or a teacher. If you've got learning." "I have some experience with bookkeeping," Abigail offered. Her father had insisted she understand every aspect of his business, unusual as that was for a woman. "That's something. Might talk to Widow Parker at the general store. She's been looking for help since her eyes started failing." Martha smiled encouragingly. "Sleep on it. Things often look different in the morning light." After Martha left, Abigail ate mechanically, her mind racing with possibilities. She had planned to keep her wealth secret in any case, to ensure Thomas Fletcher wanted her for herself, not her inheritance. Now that deception seemed prescient rather than unnecessary. If she stayed, she could build something for herself. If she claimed her full inheritance openly, she could potentially purchase property, establish a business. But would a woman alone be accepted as a business owner in the Montana Territory? And how long before word reached Philadelphia and Victor Caldwell came looking for what he believed was rightfully his? Abigail stepped to the window, gazing out at Liberty Creek as darkness fell. Lanterns were being lit along the main street, casting pools of golden light. The town was smaller than she had imagined, rougher, but there was something appealing in its straightforward nature. No pretense, no society rules to navigate. A decision began to form. She would visit the burned Pearson Ranch tomorrow. She would see for herself the land that Thomas Fletcher had described as if it were his own. Perhaps there, among the ashes of one false future, she might find the seeds of a real one. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. After a breakfast of eggs and coffee in the hotel dining room, Abigail arranged to hire a horse and wagon to take her to the Pearson property. The livery stable owner, a taciturn man named Ellis, agreed to drive her himself for $2. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not much to see out there, he warned as they set off. Just a burned-out shell and some outbuildings that didn't catch. Nevertheless, I'd like to see it. The journey took almost an hour, following a rutted track that wound through pine-covered hills and open meadows dotted with wildflowers. Despite her circumstances, Abigail found herself captivated by the landscape's untamed beauty, so different from Philadelphia's manicured parks and crowded streets. They crested a small rise, and Ellis pointed ahead. There's the Pearson place. A cluster of buildings came into view in a small valley beside a creek lined with cottonwood trees, or rather, what remained of buildings. The main house was a blackened skeleton, its stone chimney standing like a lonely sentinel among charred timbers. A barn stood nearby, its roof partially collapsed, but its structure largely intact. A smaller cabin, perhaps for hired hands, appeared undamaged, as did several corrals and a workshop of some kind. "You can let me out here," Abigail said as they approached. "Would it be possible for you to return in 2 hours?" Ellis looked doubtful. "Not much to look at for 2 hours, Mom, and it ain't exactly safe, those burned timbers." "I'll be careful. I just need some time to—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain her need to connect with this place that had featured so prominently in Fletcher's fabricated life. Ellis shrugged. "Your $2. I'll be back at midday." Once alone, Abigail approached the ruins of the main house cautiously. The scent of charred wood still hung in the air, though the fire had happened months ago. She could see where the front door had been, now just an opening in the blackened framework. Stone steps led up to it, miraculously intact. Standing on those steps, looking through the doorway at the burned interior, Abigail felt a strange connection to this place. Thomas Fletcher had described a home that had never been his, yet in her mind she had lived here already. She had imagined arranging books on shelves in the study, had pictured herself waking to sunrise through eastern windows. Turning away from the ruin, she explored the remaining structures. The barn, despite its damaged roof, was solidly built, with stalls for at least a dozen horses and a hayloft above. The smaller cabin was simple but sound, a single room with a stone fireplace, plank floors, and 2 windows. It had obviously been uninhabited since Pearson's death. Dust covered every surface, and a family of mice had taken up residence in a drawer. The workshop turned out to be a blacksmith's forge, equipped with an anvil, hammers, and other tools of the trade. Jacob Pearson had apparently done his own ironwork, a valuable skill in a place where the nearest town was 5 miles away. As Abigail completed her circuit of the property, a sense of possibility began to grow. The land itself was beautiful. A creek provided water, meadows offered grazing, and the surrounding pine forest promised shelter from winter winds. Even the burned house, with its solid stone foundation and chimney, could potentially be rebuilt. Sitting on a fallen log near the creek, Abigail made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She would not return to Philadelphia. She would not admit defeat. Instead, she would use a portion of her inheritance to purchase this property, if possible, and build something for herself. The practical challenges were enormous. A woman alone, in the Montana Territory, attempting to establish a homestead. It was unconventional at best, dangerously foolhardy at worst. But the alternative, returning east to face Victor Caldwell's smug satisfaction, was unthinkable. Abigail was still sitting by the creek, mentally calculating costs and planning initial steps, when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Expecting Ellis returning early, she was surprised to see a different wagon coming down the track. It was driven by a man she hadn't met, broad-shouldered and bearded, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. As the wagon drew closer, Abigail rose. To her feet, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. She was alone, 5 miles from town, with a stranger approaching. Her hand moved to her reticule, where she carried a small Derringer pistol, a parting gift from her father's housekeeper, who had warned her about the dangers a woman might face. When traveling alone, the wagon stopped 30 feet away. The man set the brake and climbed down, and Abigail's attention was immediately drawn to his left sleeve, which was pinned up at the elbow. "He had only one arm, ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat with his right hand. His voice was deep, with a rough edge that suggested it wasn't often used. "You're trespassing." "I beg your pardon?" Abigail straightened her spine, her fear giving way to indignation. "This is private property, Pearson land. I was informed Mr. Pearson is deceased, and the property is in probate." The man's expression didn't change. "That's correct. And I'm the caretaker until the estate is settled. Ezra Sullivan, Abigail Thornton." She debated how much to reveal, then decided on a version of the truth. "I arrived yesterday from Philadelphia, expecting to meet someone who had described this property to me, only to discover that person doesn't exist, and the property was never theirs to offer." Sullivan's weathered face showed a flicker of something. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Mail-order arrangement." Heat rose in Abigail's cheeks, but she nodded. "Yes." "Happens more than the folks admit." He glanced toward the burned house. "But this place isn't for sale, if that's what you're thinking. Nephew's coming from Minnesota. Already sent word he intends to claim his inheritance." "I see." Disappointment settled heavily on Abigail's shoulders. Her nascent plan seemed to be crumbling before it had fully formed. "When is he expected to arrive?" "August, maybe September." Sullivan shrugged his one shoulder. "Meanwhile, I keep an eye on things, make sure nobody walks off with what's left of Pearson's equipment." Abigail glanced around the property again, noting details she had missed in her initial exploration. Despite the fire and months of abandonment, there was a certain cared-for quality to the outbuildings. Someone, Sullivan presumably, had been maintaining what remained. "You were friends with Mr. Pearson?" she asked. "Neighbors. My forge is 3 miles west. Jacob brought work my way when his own forge couldn't handle it." He paused. "When he fell ill, I promised I'd look after the place until his nephew arrived." A new possibility occurred to Abigail. "Mr. Sullivan, would it be possible for me to rent the small cabin until the nephew arrives? I find myself in need of accommodations, and returning east isn't an option I wish to pursue." Sullivan's expression remained impassive, but she saw assessment in his eyes. "Lady like you, alone out here, 5 miles from town? Not advisable. I appreciate your concern, but I'm more capable than I appear." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "I'm willing to pay a fair rent, and I could help maintain the property, while you attend to your own business. And what happens when the nephew arrives and wants you gone? By then, I'll have had time to consider other options, or to make the nephew an offer he couldn't refuse," though she kept that thought to herself. Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "Cabin needs work, roof leaks in 3 places. Fireplace smokes unless the wind's just right." "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Sullivan." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. $5 a month, includes use of the well and whatever's growing in the kitchen garden. Tools in the barn are off limits without permission. Same goes for the forge." "That seems fair." It was more than fair. It was generous. "I check the property every few days. Won't enter the cabin without invitation. But I'll expect to see progress on those repairs." Abigail extended her hand. "We have an agreement, Mr. Sullivan." After a moment's hesitation, he shook it, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. His palm was calloused, his grip firm but careful. "Miss Thornton." He released her hand and gestured toward his wagon. "I can take you back to town to collect your belongings." As they drove away from the Pearson property, Abigail looked back at the burned house silhouetted against the Montana sky. Thomas Fletcher's deception had led her to this moment, stranded in the wilderness, about to embark on a life so different from anything she had known that she could barely imagine its contours. Yet, as the property disappeared from view, Abigail felt something unexpected, not despair, not regret, but a curious sense of anticipation. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges she couldn't yet fully comprehend. But it was her path, chosen freely, leading away from Philadelphia's constraints toward a future limited only by her own courage and determination. The ground beneath her feet was shifting once again, but this time Abigail Thornton was prepared to stand firm. 3 days after moving into the cabin at the former Pearson Ranch, Abigail Thornton awoke to water dripping steadily onto her forehead. The promised roof leaks had made themselves known during the night's sudden rainstorm, and now her bedding was soaked through. "Wonderful," she muttered, climbing from the narrow cot and positioning her wash basin to catch the worst of the drips. The cabin, which had seemed quaint and full of potential by daylight, revealed its true character in the rain: dark, damp, and decidedly unwelcoming. The fireplace had indeed smoked terribly when she'd attempted to cook the previous evening, forcing her to make do with cold biscuits and jerky purchased from Widow Parker's store. Abigail changed into her work dress, a practical brown cotton garment that had scandalized her Philadelphia dressmaker. "No lady needs such crude attire," the woman had sniffed. Now, as Abigail laced up her sturdy boots, she silently thanked her own foresight. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter by the time she stepped outside to assess the damage. The cabin roof's cedar shingles had rotted in several places, creating the leaks that had disturbed her sleep. Repairing it would require materials she didn't have, and skills she hadn't yet acquired. A sound from the direction of the barn caught her attention. Someone was moving around inside, Sullivan most likely, checking on the property as promised. Abigail hesitated, reluctant to appear helpless, but practicality won out. She needed information, if not assistance. Ezra Sullivan was examining the barn's damaged roof when she entered, his back to her, as he made notes in a small leather-bound book. Despite his missing left arm, he moved with surprising grace, balancing effortlessly on a ladder as he inspected the roof beams. "Mr. Sullivan," she called, not wanting to startle him. He turned, tucking the notebook into his pocket. "Miss Thornton." His gaze took in her damp hair and mud-spattered dress. "Roof leaks are worse than I mentioned." "Yes." Abigail lifted her chin. "I need to purchase repair materials. Could you recommend where I might acquire shingles and whatever else is necessary?" Sullivan descended the ladder, moving with the careful precision of a man who had learned to adapt to his limitations. "Wilkerson's lumber mill, 8 miles north. But those roof repairs will require more than materials. I'm a quick learner." A ghost of a smile touched his bearded face. "No doubt, but some tasks need 2 hands." The blunt reference to his disability surprised her. She'd expected him to avoid mentioning it, as most people skirted uncomfortable topics with layers of polite fiction. "Then perhaps we could arrange an exchange," she suggested. "I noticed the garden's been neglected. I could restore it in exchange for your assistance with the roof." Sullivan's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his grey eyes. "Not much of a gardener. And I'm not much of a carpenter. It seems we each have something to offer." He considered this, then nodded once. "I'll bring shingles tomorrow. Need to measure the damage first." He gestured toward the barn roof. "This needs attention too, before the hay storage is compromised. I appreciate the help." Abigail hesitated. "Would you like coffee? I managed that much before the fireplace smoked me out." "Fireplace needs cleaning. Chimney's likely blocked." He glanced at the cabin. "I can look at that too." She hadn't expected such ready assistance. "Thank you, but I don't want to impose on your time." "Not imposition. Looking after the property's my responsibility. That includes making sure you don't freeze or drown before winter." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Abigail detected something else beneath it, a gruff kindness he seemed determined to disguise as mere obligation. The next morning brought Ezra Sullivan and his wagon loaded with cedar shingles, roofing tools, and a collection of items Abigail hadn't thought to request: chimney brushes, a small stepladder, a coil of wire, and several glass panes to replace the cracked window in the cabin's rear wall. "You've been busy," she observed, as he unloaded the supplies. "Figured we'd handle all the urgent repairs at once." Sullivan set down a crate of nails with his one arm, the muscles bunching visibly beneath his worn shirt. "Weather holds. We can finish before sunset." "We? Unless you've learned roofing since yesterday." Despite his gruff manner, Abigail found herself warming to Sullivan's directness. There was no condescension in his offer of help, just practical assessment of what needed doing. "I'll pay for the materials," she said, reaching for her reticule. He shook his head. "Property account. Jacob left funds for maintenance. Then I insist on providing lunch, at least. And I'll start in the garden this afternoon." The day unfolded in a rhythm of shared labor. Sullivan tackled the cabin roof first, working with a methodical efficiency that belied his handicap. He had clearly developed techniques to compensate for his missing arm, using his knees, teeth, and even occasionally his chin to hold items while his right hand wielded tools. Abigail served as his assistant, handing up nails and shingles when needed, steadying the ladder and learning the basics of roof repair through careful observation. By midday, the worst leaks were patched, and they paused for a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples that Abigail had brought from town. "You mentioned you're a blacksmith," she said, as they sat on the cabin's small porch. "Is your forge nearby?" Sullivan nodded, chewing methodically. 3 miles west, built it 5 years ago. After... She gestured vaguely toward his pinned sleeve. His expression closed slightly. "After Gettysburg. Wasn't much use as a soldier with one arm." The war had ended 18 years earlier, which meant Sullivan had been adapting to his injury for nearly 2 decades. That explained his competence, the way he moved as if the missing limb were merely an inconvenience rather than a disability. "You must be very skilled to work iron single-handed." "Had to relearn everything, design my own tools." He shrugged. "You adapt or you don't survive." The simple philosophy resonated with Abigail's current circumstances. She too was adapting, learning skills her Philadelphia life had never required. "What brought you to Montana?" she asked. Sullivan considered the question with the same deliberation. He seemed to apply to everything. "Wanted land of my own, wanted quiet." He glanced at her. "What really brought you?" "Mail-order brides usually come from necessity." The direct question caught her off guard. For a moment, she considered giving him the practiced story she had prepared. A spinster schoolteacher seeking a new beginning. But something about Sullivan's straightforwardness deserved reciprocal honesty. "My father died last winter," she said. "His business partner expected to acquire both the business and me through marriage. I chose a different path. You chose a fictional rancher in Montana over a real businessman in Philadelphia." Sullivan's tone wasn't judgmental, merely thoughtful. "Must have been a powerful motivation." "Victor Caldwell is not a kind man. The business arrangement would have been advantageous for him. The marriage would have been less advantageous. For me." Sullivan nodded once, accepting her explanation without pressing for details. "Ready to tackle the chimney?" The chimney cleaning proved more challenging than the roof repair. Years of creosote buildup had nearly blocked the flue, explaining the smoke problem Abigail had encountered. Sullivan fashioned a scraper from wire and attached it to a length of rope, then demonstrated how to lower it from the chimney top and work it up and down to loosen the debris. "I can do this part," Abigail insisted, taking the rope. "You've already done more than your share." Sullivan stepped back, allowing her to take over. "Might want to cover your hair. Gets messy." He was right. By the time the chimney was clean, Abigail was coated in soot from her kerchief-covered hair to her boots. But when they tested the fireplace with a small fire, the smoke rose properly, up the chimney instead of billowing into the cabin. "Success!" she exclaimed, forgetting her disheveled appearance in the satisfaction of accomplishment. Sullivan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You learn quick." The unexpected praise warmed her more than it should have. "I had a good teacher." As twilight approached, they had completed the most critical repairs: the leaking roof, the smoking chimney, and the cracked window. The cabin, while still rustic by any standard, was now at least weatherproof and functional. "The garden tomorrow," Abigail said, as Sullivan loaded his tools back into his wagon. "I notice there are some vegetables struggling beneath the weeds. With proper care, they might recover." Jacob's wife had a way with growing things. Sullivan's voice held a trace of something like regret. "Place hasn't been the same since she passed 3 years back." It was the most personal observation he had offered all day, a glimpse of the man beneath the taciturn exterior. "I'm sorry for his loss. For the community's loss." Sullivan nodded. He was a good neighbor, didn't judge a one-armed blacksmith when others wondered what use I'd be. "Their loss, I'd say." Abigail surprised herself with the forthright comment. Sullivan's gaze met hers, assessing. After a moment he reached into his wagon and retrieved a burlap sack. "Seeds," he explained, handing it to her. "From my own garden. Beans, squash, carrots. Still time to get them started before fall." The unexpected gift touched her. "Thank you, I'll make good use of them." "No doubt." He climbed onto the wagon seat with practiced ease. "I'll return in 2 days to check the repairs. Storms come up sudden this time of year." As his wagon disappeared down the track, Abigail surveyed the cabin and surrounding property with new eyes. What had seemed overwhelming that morning now felt manageable, a challenge she could meet with the right knowledge and assistance. Inside the cabin, she washed away the day's grime as best she could with water from the well, then lit a small fire in the now functional fireplace. As flames cast dancing shadows on the log walls, Abigail opened her trunk and removed a false bottom, revealing the hidden compartment where she kept the bulk of her fortune. The bank drafts were still there, untouched, along with a small leather pouch containing gold coins, emergency funds her father had insisted she carry. She returned everything except a single bank draft for $500. Tomorrow she would ride into Liberty Creek and open an account at the Frontier Bank, establishing herself as a woman of modest but independent means. Sleep came easily that night, undisturbed by leaks or smoke, and Abigail woke with renewed determination. The garden would be her first priority, a visible sign of her commitment to this place that fate had delivered her to through deception. The summer sun was already warm as she began the laborious process of clearing weeds from what had once been a well-tended kitchen garden. Beneath the tangle of wilderness, she discovered surviving rhubarb, asparagus, and a patch of strawberries. A few tomato plants struggled valiantly, though their fruit was small and sparse. By midday, her back ached and her hands were blistered despite the gloves she'd worn. Philadelphia had not prepared her for such labor, but as she paused to drink from the dipper at the well, Abigail felt a satisfaction that transcended physical discomfort. This was tangible progress, visible evidence of her determination to forge a new life. She was plotting out rows for Sullivan's donated seeds when the sound of approaching hoofbeats once again interrupted her solitude. This time, however, it wasn't Sullivan's wagon, but a gleaming black buggy pulled by a matched pair of bay horses. The conveyance spoke of wealth and status, incongruous against the backdrop of the ruined ranch. A man in an expensive suit climbed down from the buggy. He was perhaps 40, with the florid complexion of someone who enjoyed rich food and generous quantities of spirits. His beard was neatly trimmed, his watch chain gold, his manner as he approached Abigail suggesting confidence bordering on arrogance. "A good day, madam," he called, removing his hat to reveal thinning hair carefully arranged to disguise its retreat. "Lawrence Preston at your service. I understand you're temporarily residing on the Pearson property." Abigail straightened, conscious of her soil-stained dress and disheveled appearance. "Abigail Thornton. Yes, I'm renting the cabin until Mr. Pearson's nephew arrives to claim his inheritance." Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, yes, the mysterious nephew. A convenient fiction, I'm afraid. I beg your pardon? Jacob Pearson died intestate, without a will. His nearest relation is a second cousin in Ohio who has no interest in frontier property." Preston brushed imaginary dust from his sleeve. "As president of the Liberty Creek Bank and chairman of the County Probate Committee, I can assure you that this property will be auctioned for back taxes by September." Abigail's mind raced. If Sullivan had lied about the nephew, what else had he misrepresented? "I see," she said carefully. "That's valuable information, Mr. Preston. Thank you for sharing it." "Not at all." Preston's gaze traveled from the garden to the cabin, assessing. "I must say, I'm surprised to find a lady of obvious refinement in such rustic circumstances, particularly given the, caretaker Mr. Sullivan assigned himself." The slight emphasis on caretaker carried unmistakable disdain, as did the reference to Sullivan. "Mr. Sullivan has been most helpful in making necessary repairs," Abigail replied, her tone cooling. "The cabin is quite comfortable now." "Indeed. Well, should you find yourself in need of more suitable accommodations, my wife and I would be pleased to host you at our home in town until more permanent arrangements can be made." Preston's smile broadened. "Liberty Creek welcomes newcomers. Of quality, Miss Thornton." The implication was clear. Preston was separating her from Sullivan, placing them in different social categories. The fact that he had correctly identified her as unmarried, Miss rather than Mrs., suggested he had already made inquiries about her in town. "That's very kind, but I'm quite satisfied with my current situation." Abigail gestured toward the garden. "As you can see, I've begun establishing myself here." Preston's expression registered a brief surprise at her refusal, quickly masked. "Of course, but should you change your mind, or should you require banking services, please call me." He reached into his coat and produced a business card. "The Liberty Creek Bank stands ready to assist newcomers with the capital to contribute to our growing community." Abigail accepted the card with a polite nod. "I'll keep that in mind." After another assessing look at the property, Preston returned to his buggy, the matched bays trotting smartly as they pulled away down the track. Abigail watched until they disappeared from view, a frown creasing her forehead. The encounter had raised more questions than it answered. If there was no nephew, why had Sullivan invented one? And if the property was to be auctioned for back taxes, did that mean it could potentially be purchased by anyone with sufficient funds? Abigail returned to her gardening with renewed energy, her mind working through possibilities as her hands continued the labor of reclamation. By the time dusk fell, she had cleared half the garden plot and planted 3 rows of beans from Sullivan's seed collection. Tired but satisfied, she prepared a simple meal over the now properly functioning fireplace. As she ate, Abigail once again considered her circumstances. Perhaps fate had not been so cruel after all in delivering her to this burned Homestead. If Lawrence Preston was correct about the property's status, it might be possible for her to acquire it legitimately at the tax auction. But first, she needed the truth from Ezra Sullivan. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As Abigail finished washing her dishes in the gathering darkness, she heard the now familiar sound of Sullivan's wagon approaching. She stepped onto the porch, a lantern in hand, and watched as he drew up before the cabin. "Evening," he called, setting the brake. "Thought I'd check how the roof held during today's heat. Sun can loosen new shingles." "The roof is fine," Abigail replied. "But I've had an interesting visitor today, Mr. Lawrence Preston of the Liberty Creek Bank." Sullivan's expression hardened. "Preston? What did he want?" "To inform me that there is no nephew, and that this property will be auctioned for back taxes. In September." Abigail kept her voice level. "I'd appreciate the truth, Mr. Sullivan." Sullivan remained silent for a long moment, his expression inscrutable in the lantern light. Finally, he dismounted from the wagon with his characteristic careful movements. "You should hear the truth. Inside would be better." Once seated at Abigail's small table, Sullivan ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that suggested discomfort rather than deception. "There is a nephew," he began. "Matthew Pearson, from St. Paul, not Minnesota. But Preston's right about one thing. He's not coming. Got a letter 3 weeks ago saying he's not interested in worthless frontier property. Too busy with his law practice to bother with his uncle's legacy." "Then why tell me otherwise?" "Because Preston's been trying to get this land for 2 years. Sullivan's voice hardened. "Offered Jacob half its value before he died. Tried to pressure him when he was sick. Now he's manipulating the tax situation to grab it cheap at auction. What makes this property so valuable to him?" Sullivan's gaze was steady. "Water rights. Creek that runs through the east pasture feeds half the ranches downstream. Preston wants to control it, charge for access." Abigail considered this new information. "So the property will indeed be auctioned, unless back taxes are paid. About $300. $300, a substantial sum, but well within her means. And if someone were to pay those taxes, they'd have first claim at auction, could probably acquire the property for another $500. Sullivan studied her with new intensity. "You thinking of staying permanent?" "Perhaps." Abigail chose her words carefully. "I came west seeking a fresh start. This place, despite its condition, has potential. It's backbreaking work. Winters are brutal. Towns 5 miles away." "I'm aware of the challenges." Sullivan leaned forward slightly. "Why would an educated Eastern woman choose this life? Truth this time." The blunt question deserved a frank answer. "Because I won't return to Philadelphia to be controlled by a man who sees me as property to be acquired along with my father's business." Abigail met his gaze directly. "I'd rather face Montana winters and backbreaking work than surrender my independence." Something like respect flickered in Sullivan's eyes. "Fair enough." He rubbed his bearded chin thoughtfully. "If you're serious about the property, I should show you exactly what you'd be taking on. There's more than just the buildings. I'd appreciate that. Tomorrow, then, I'll bring the horses." After Sullivan departed, Abigail sat by the fire, contemplating the day's revelations. Lawrence Preston's visit made more sense now. He was assessing potential competition for property he coveted. Her presence complicated his plans, especially if she had the means to outbid him. The question was whether she truly wanted to commit to this place. $300 in back taxes plus perhaps $500 at auction would secure her legal ownership. Another $1,000 for essential repairs and equipment would make it habitable and potentially productive. Her fortune could easily absorb such expenditures. But money alone wouldn't transform a burned homestead into a working ranch. That would require knowledge she didn't possess, labor she couldn't provide alone, and connections in a community where she was a stranger. Unless, of course, she had a partner who offered exactly those assets. The thought of proposing a business arrangement with Ezra Sullivan had occurred to her more than once during their day of shared labor. His skills complemented her resources, his knowledge countered her inexperience. But would a man who valued independence as fiercely as she did consider such a partnership? Morning brought clear skies, and Sullivan arriving on horseback, leading a sturdy grey mare for Abigail. He'd brought proper riding clothes as well, trousers, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. "Can't show you the property properly in that," he said. Nodding at her skirt, Abigail accepted the clothing without protest. Practicality trumped propriety in the Montana Territory, and she'd already seen evidence of Sullivan's matter-of-fact approach to difficult situations. Once changed, she mounted, the mare with more confidence than she felt. Her riding experience was limited to sedate park outings in Philadelphia, not open country exploration. "You'll do fine," Sullivan said, noting her apprehension. "Maisie's gentle as they come." The tour began with the cleared land surrounding the main buildings, approximately 40 acres of pasture and former cropland. Sullivan pointed out the fertile soil near the creek, where Jacob Pearson had grown wheat and barley, good for vegetables too, with proper irrigation. Jacob's wife Mary had the best kitchen garden in the county. They rode along the creek that formed the property's eastern boundary, Sullivan explaining water rights and seasonal flow patterns. The stream was modest now in summer's heat, but he described spring runoff that could transform it into a surging waterway. That's why Preston wants control. During drought years, he could charge whatever he wanted for access. Beyond the cleared land lay pine forest that climbed gentle slopes toward the mountains visible in the distance. Sullivan pointed out valuable timber stands, game trails, and a small trout pond hidden among the trees. "Property extends another quarter-mile that way," he said, gesturing north. "About 600 acres total. Jacob homesteaded most of it, bought the rest from a miner who gave up and headed to California." As they turned their horses back toward the main buildings, Abigail felt a growing sense of connection to the land. There was raw beauty here, and potential that even the burned homestead couldn't diminish. "What would you do with it?" she asked, "if the property were yours?" Sullivan considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Rebuild smaller, focus on the smithy, good location for serving ranches between here and Liberty Creek. Maybe raise some horses." He glanced at her. "Not that it matters. Don't have funds for taxes, let alone auction." The opening had presented itself naturally. Abigail gathered her courage. What if funds were available as part of a partnership arrangement? Sullivan reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "Partnership? I have some capital," she said, deliberately vague about the amount, "enough to secure the property and begin rebuilding. What I lack is practical knowledge and connections in the community. You have both." His expression gave nothing away. "You're proposing a business arrangement. Yes, equal ownership, shared decisions and profits. You would contribute your skills and labor. I would provide the necessary funds." Pretty significant. Imbalance. Land and buildings alone would be worth 20 times whatever labor I could contribute. "Not if that labor transforms a ruin into a working ranch." Abigail gestured toward the burned house. "This land is worthless to me without the knowledge to develop it properly." Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "Why me? Plenty of men in Liberty Creek would jump at such an offer from a woman like you, because you've demonstrated competence without condescension, because you understand the value of independence, and because you're already invested in this property through your promise to Jacob Pearson." The reference to his deceased friend seemed to strike home. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. "Jacob would have liked you. Never much patience for, and pretense." They continued riding in silence, circling back toward the cabin. As they approached, Sullivan finally spoke. "I'd need to see proof of your financial capacity before considering such an arrangement. And we'd require a formal contract, Properly witnessed and recorded, hope surged through Abigail. It wasn't acceptance, but it was progress. Of course, I can provide bank references and draft a partnership agreement for your review. Do that, Sullivan said, his tone neutral. Then we'll talk specifics. The next morning, Abigail rode into Liberty Creek, her reticule containing a bank draft that would establish her financial credibility. She had spent much of the night drafting a partnership proposal, trying to anticipate Sullivan's concerns and address them fairly. Liberty Creek was busier than on her arrival day, the main street crowded, with wagons and horsemen. Saturday was evidently a trading day for surrounding ranches. As she tied her borrowed mare outside the Liberty Creek Bank, Abigail straightened her shoulders, preparing to enter Lawrence Preston's domain. The bank occupied a two-story brick building, unusually substantial for the frontier town. Inside, polished wood counters and brass fittings conveyed prosperity and permanence. A young clerk approached immediately. "May I help you, ma'am?" "I'd like to open an account and arrange a transfer of funds from Philadelphia." Abigail produced her identification papers and bank draft. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Preston directly about establishing proper references." The clerk's eyes widened slightly at the draft's amount. "Of course. Please follow me." Lawrence Preston's office reflected his status, leather-bound books lined cherrywood shelves, while a massive desk dominated the space. The banker rose as Abigail entered, his surprise at her appearance quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Miss Thornton, what an unexpected pleasure. Please, be seated." Abigail took the offered chair. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Mr. Preston, I've come to establish an account with your bank." "Excellent. Liberty Creek Bank welcomes new depositors, especially those bringing Eastern capital to our growing community." His smile was practiced, his gaze calculating. "May I ask what brings you to our establishment, rather than simply returning east? I understood your situation was temporary." "My plans have evolved. I'm considering acquiring property in the area." Preston's expression sharpened with interest. "Indeed, any particular property caught your eye?" "I'm exploring options," Abigail replied smoothly. "The Pearson Ranch has potential despite its current condition." "Ah." Preston leaned back slightly. "While I admire your entrepreneurial spirit, Miss Thornton, I feel obligated to advise you that rehabilitating such a property would require substantial investment beyond the purchase price. Not to mention knowledge of local conditions and appropriate connections in the community. I'm developing those connections, Mr. Preston. In fact, I'm considering a partnership arrangement with someone who possesses the experience I currently lack." The banker's expression cooled noticeably. "I see. May I ask who this potential partner might be?" "I prefer not to discuss preliminary negotiations." Abigail kept her tone pleasant but firm. "Now, regarding my account, for the next half hour, they conducted banking business with professional courtesy, underlaid by mutual wariness. Preston established her account with efficiency while probing subtly for details about her resources and intentions. Abigail provided the minimum information necessary while ensuring her financial credibility was firmly established. As she prepared to leave, Preston made one final attempt. "Miss Thornton, as a newcomer to our community, you may not be aware of all the complexities involved in frontier property transactions. I would be happy to advise you on appropriate investment opportunities better suited to a lady of your background." "That's very kind." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "But I've always found direct experience the best teacher. Good day, Mr. Preston." Outside the bank, Abigail paused to collect herself. The encounter had confirmed her suspicions. Preston would not easily surrender his plans for the Pearson property. Her presence and apparent financial capacity had transformed her from an irrelevant transient to a potential competitor. Her next stop was Widow Parker's general store, where she purchased cooking supplies, seeds for the garden, and fabric to make curtains for the cabin windows. The widow, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, was a fountain of community information, sharing opinions on everything from weather predictions to the history of local families. "Heard you're staying out at poor Jacob's place," she said as she measured the calico. "Brave woman, living so far from town. Though I suppose with Ezra Sullivan checking on you, you're safer than most." "Mr. Sullivan has been very helpful," Abigail agreed carefully. Widow Parker's eyes twinkled. "He's a good man for all his gruffness. Hasn't had an easy time since the war took his arm, but he's respected. Fine blacksmith, honest to a fault. The community values his work. Couldn't manage without him. Only Smith and Helena can handle the complicated repairs. Designed his own tools, you know. Clever man." The widow leaned forward slightly. "Never. Married, though not for lack of interest from certain quarters. Miranda Reynolds over at the boarding house has been setting her cap for him for years." This unexpected information gave Abigail pause. She had considered Sullivan primarily in terms of his potential as a business partner. The reminder that he was also a bachelor in a community where men outnumbered women significantly added a dimension she hadn't fully considered. "I'm sure Mr. Sullivan makes his own decisions about personal matters," she said neutrally. "Stubborn as they come," Widow Parker agreed cheerfully. "But then, the best ones usually are." By the time Abigail returned to the cabin that afternoon, her saddlebags were full and her mind was churning with new information. The community dynamics were more complex than she had initially realized, and her proposed partnership with Sullivan would have social as well as economic implications. She was hanging newly made curtains when Sullivan's wagon appeared. He had brought lumber, window panes and tools, enough materials to begin more substantial repairs to the cabin. "Thought we might fix that wobbly porch before it collapses under you," he said by way of greeting. "If you're still planning to stay." Abigail stepped outside. "I've opened an account at the Liberty Creek Bank and drafted a preliminary partnership proposal for your review." She handed him the document she had prepared so carefully. "Please take your time considering it. It's an important decision for both of us." Sullivan tucked the paper into his shirt. "I'll look it over tonight." He began unloading timber from the wagon. "Meanwhile, porch won't fix itself." They worked together through the afternoon, Sullivan directing while Abigail assisted. He had developed remarkable adaptations for working one-handed, using his knees, shoulder, and occasionally his teeth to hold materials, while his right hand manipulated tools. Watching him problem-solve without complaint gave Abigail a deeper appreciation for his resilience. By sunset, the porch had been reinforced, its rotting supports replaced with solid pine posts. Sullivan stepped back to assess their work. "Hold now. We can replace the floorboards tomorrow if the weather holds." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "You haven't agreed to the partnership yet." Something almost like a smile touched his bearded face. "Consider it an act of good faith while I review your proposal." He climbed into his wagon. "I'll be back at sunrise. Might bring breakfast, if you're amenable." After he'd gone, Abigail sat on the newly reinforced porch, watching darkness gather over the land that might soon be partly hers. The day's events had accelerated her plans in ways she hadn't anticipated. Preston's obvious interest in the property created urgency, while Sullivan's tentative cooperation offered hope. She was no longer just seeking temporary shelter or even personal independence. She was laying the groundwork for something more permanent, a true, fresh start in this wild, beautiful place that had begun to feel like home despite its challenges. Inside the cabin, Abigail lit the lamp and once again opened her trunk's secret compartment. This time she removed not just funds, but the deed to her father's business in Philadelphia. Victor Caldwell would be looking for her by now, realizing belatedly that she had taken more than personal belongings when she fled. If she committed to this place, to this partnership with Ezra Sullivan, she would need to resolve her Philadelphia affairs permanently. That meant selling the business formally, transferring all assets west, and cutting the final ties to her former life. It was a momentous decision, yet Abigail felt strangely calm as she contemplated it. The burned homestead, for all its challenges, offered something she had never found in Philadelphia, the chance to build something that was truly her own, on her own terms. Tomorrow, Sullivan would return with his decision about their partnership. Tomorrow, she would take another step toward claiming this unexpected future or retreat from it. Either way, Abigail Thornton was no longer the desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach searching for a fictional husband. She was becoming someone stronger, more determined, more capable of shaping her own destiny. And that transformation, she reflected as she prepared for sleep, might be the most valuable foundation being built on this reclaimed land. Dawn was just breaking when Ezra Sullivan's wagon rumbled up to the cabin. True to his word, he had brought breakfast, freshly baked bread, smoked bacon, and a jar of wild raspberry preserves. Abigail, already up and dressed, felt a flutter of anticipation as she watched him approach. His expression gave nothing away as he carried the food inside. "Coffee's ready," she said, gesturing to the pot bubbling on the hearth. Sullivan nodded, setting the provisions on the small table she had scrubbed to gleaming smoothness. Neither mentioned the partnership proposal as they prepared the simple meal together, moving around the cabin's confined space with a rhythm that suggested growing familiarity. It wasn't until they were seated, plates before them, that Sullivan reached inside his jacket and withdrew her document, now dog-eared from repeated reading. "Your terms are fair," he said without preamble, "but there's one condition I'd add." Abigail set down her fork. "What condition?" "If we do this, acquire the property, rebuild it, we need to be clear on what happens if one partner wants to dissolve." "The arrangement." His grey eyes held hers steadily. "I won't risk building something only to be bought out when it becomes inconvenient." The concern revealed more about his past experiences than any personal story might have. Someone, somewhere, had betrayed his trust in a business matter. "That's reasonable," she replied. "What do you propose?" 5-year minimum commitment. After that, if either wants out, the other has first right to buy their share at fair market value, determined by independent assessment. Abigail considered this. 5 years was substantial, longer than she had initially envisioned, yet his wariness matched her own need for security. "Agreed," she said. "And I'd add that neither partner can sell their share to Lawrence Preston, or any entity he controls, regardless of circumstances." Sullivan's expression lightened marginally. "You learn quick." "I had a good teacher in business matters." She offered a small smile. "My father believed women should understand contracts, especially when men assume they don't." Smart man. Sullivan pushed the amended document across the table. "I'll sign if you will." They formalized the agreement on the spot, each signing below the additional terms they had written in by hand. The document wasn't legally binding yet, that would require a notary's seal, but the mutual commitment was established. "First order of business," Sullivan said, returning to his breakfast. "Paying those back taxes before Preston realizes what we're doing. I'll ride into Liberty Creek this morning." "Better if I go. Preston watches you too closely already. I can handle the tax office without drawing attention." The logic was sound, though Abigail hesitated at relinquishing control of such a significant financial transaction. "Very well, but I'll prepare a bank draft rather than sending cash." While Sullivan finished eating, Abigail retrieved funds from her hidden cash and carefully prepared the draft. $300, enough to clear the property's tax debt and establish their claim before the auction. "What's our next priority after securing the taxes?" she asked, handing him the draft. planning the rebuild. Sullivan pocketed the document carefully. Need to decide what structures take precedence, what can wait till next spring. The forge, Abigail said immediately. If we're establishing a business, we should prioritize income-generating capabilities. Sullivan's eyebrows rose slightly. At her quick assessment, forge requires specialized construction, stone foundation, proper ventilation, water access, but it would establish our presence in the community as more than just homesteaders. We'd be providing essential services. We, he repeated, something unreadable passing through his eyes. You've thought this through. I've had little else to occupy my mind these past days. Abigail gestured toward the cabin. And practical planning is preferable to dwelling on deceptions or misfortunes. After Sullivan departed for Liberty Creek, Abigail returned to the garden, throwing herself into the physical labor with renewed purpose. Now that they had a formal agreement, every improvement to the property represented an investment in their shared future. By midday, she had cleared another sizable section and discovered more surviving plants beneath the wilderness, herbs gone. Wild that, with proper tending, would provide both culinary and medicinal benefits. She was carefully transplanting mint when the sound of approaching horses caught her attention. This time it wasn't Sullivan or Preston, but a woman perhaps a few years older than Abigail, riding side-saddle on a gleaming chestnut mare. Her dress, while appropriate for frontier travel, showed quality and current Eastern styling. Her blonde hair was arranged in a fashionable coiffure beneath a small hat adorned with a single feather. "Hello there," the woman called, reining in her horse. "You must be the Philadelphia lady everyone's talking about." She dismounted with practiced grace. "Miranda Reynolds. I own the boarding house in Liberty Creek." Abigail wiped her soil-covered hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her work-rumpled appearance. "Abigail Thornton, please excuse my disheveled state." "Nonsense. I admire a woman who isn't afraid of honest work." Miranda's assessing gaze took in the garden, the cabin, and Abigail herself. "May I offer some advice, one newcomer to another? I arrived from Boston just 3 years ago." "Of course. Liberty Creek society is small, but particular about certain matters. A single woman living alone 5 miles from town creates talk. A single woman frequently visited by a bachelor like Ezra Sullivan creates considerably more." The directness of the observation caught Abigail off guard. "Mr. Sullivan is the caretaker of this property. His visits have been entirely proper." "I'm sure they have." Miranda's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "But perception matters in small communities. I'd be happy to offer you a room at my boarding house until you're better established." "Much more suitable for a lady of your background." The offer echoed Preston's, though framed differently. Was it genuine concern from one Eastern transplant to another, or something else entirely? "That's very kind," Abigail replied carefully. "But I've committed to rehabilitating this property. The cabin suits my needs while that work progresses." "I see." Miranda brushed imaginary dust from her skirt. "Well, my invitation stands should you change your mind. Liberty Creek can be quite welcoming to newcomers who observe certain proprieties." The emphasis on proprieties wasn't subtle. "I'll keep that in mind," Abigail said, her tone cooling slightly. "Please do." Miranda remounted her horse with the same practiced elegance. "By the way, I'm hosting a small social gathering next Saturday evening. Nothing elaborate, just a few of the town's leading citizens. Your presence would be most welcome." The invitation surprised Abigail. "Thank you. I'll consider it." After Miranda departed, Abigail returned to her gardening with less enthusiasm. The woman's visit had unsettled her, raising questions about community expectations and her own unconventional situation. Was Miranda genuinely concerned about Abigail's reputation, or was there another motive behind her pointed remarks about Ezra Sullivan. Widow Parker's comment about Miranda setting her cap for Sullivan took on new significance. If the boarding house owner had designs on the blacksmith, Abigail's partnership with him, both business and residential, might be viewed as unwelcome competition. Sullivan returned late in the afternoon, his expression containing something Abigail hadn't seen before: satisfaction bordering on triumph. "Taxes paid in full," he announced, handing her the receipt. "Property cleared from auction eligibility. Preston won't know until he checks the tax rolls next week." "Excellent." Abigail examined the document, noting with approval the official stamp and signature. "Did anyone question the transaction? Tax office doesn't care where money comes from, only that it arrives." Sullivan glanced around the garden, noticing the progress she'd made. "You've been busy." "As have you." She regarded him thoughtfully. "Miranda Reynolds paid me a visit today." Something flickered across his face. Wariness, perhaps, or resignation. "Did she now?" "She expressed concern about the propriety of my living arrangements, particularly your frequent visits. Then invited me to a social gathering at her boarding house." Sullivan snorted softly. "Miranda collects social obligations, like some collect postage stamps, gives her leverage. She seemed particularly interested in my connection to you." "We have history," he said flatly, in a tone that discouraged further inquiry. But Abigail pressed on, needing to understand the community dynamics that might affect their partnership. "What kind of history?" Sullivan remained silent for a long moment. "Her father owned the land where my forge stands. After he died, she tried to break the 99-year lease he'd granted me. Took it to court. Lost." He shrugged his one shoulder. "She's been looking for ways to undermine me since." "I see." Abigail absorbed this new information. "And you think her visit today was part of that effort?" "Miranda doesn't make social calls without purpose." Sullivan's expression hardened slightly. "Don't underestimate her. She has Preston's ear, along with half the town council." The alliance between Miranda Reynolds and Lawrence Preston added a concerning dimension to their challenges. If the two were working together, securing the property might be only the first battle in a longer conflict. "Should I accept her invitation to the social gathering?" Abigail asked. "It might be an opportunity to better understand what we're facing." Sullivan considered this. "Might at that. But go in with your eyes open. Miranda's parlor games have sharp edges. With the tax issue resolved, they turned their attention to planning the property's rehabilitation. Sullivan had brought paper and drafting tools, and they spent the evening at the cabin's small table, sketching layouts for the new forge and modifications to the existing structures. "Forge here," Sullivan indicated, marking a spot near the creek. "With drainage sloping away from the water, we'll need stone foundation, brick walls, metal roof to prevent fire spread." "What about living quarters?" Abigail asked, studying the rough diagram. Sullivan hesitated. Hadn't considered that part yet. The unspoken question hung between them. Would they continue their separate living arrangements once the property was secured, or create a more integrated operation? "We should maintain appropriate boundaries," Abigail said carefully, "while ensuring practical efficiency." "Cabin for you," Sullivan suggested, marking the existing structure. "Small house near the forge for me, close enough for security and cooperation, separate enough for propriety." The solution was elegant in its simplicity, addressing both practical and social concerns. "Perfect," Abigail agreed, relieved that he understood the delicate balance required. As darkness fell, they moved from planning to implementation, identifying tasks for the coming days and materials they would need to order from Liberty Creek. And Helena. Their conversation flowed more easily now, the formal partnership providing structure for their growing personal comfort with each other. "Miranda's social gathering," Sullivan said as he prepared to leave. "You should go, but not alone." "Are you offering to escort me?" Abigail asked, surprised. would defeat the purpose. Miranda would see it as confirmation of whatever she's implying. About us, he considered for a moment. Widow Parker would be better. She's respected, knows everyone's business, and isn't afraid of either Miranda or Preston. Would she agree to such an arrangement? For the chance to witness Miranda's reaction to your appearance? Absolutely. A rare smile briefly transformed Sullivan's serious features. Sarah Parker enjoys nothing more than observing other people's discomfort when their plans go awry. 2 days later, Abigail rode into Liberty Creek with a dual purpose: to formally register their partnership agreement at the county clerk's office and to visit Widow Parker regarding the social gathering. The clerk, a thin man named Simmons, raised eyebrows at the document, but duly recorded it in the county ledger. Partnership between unmarried individuals of opposite genders is unusual, he commented as he applied the official seal, but everything appears in order. Property taxes are current, and both parties signed willingly. Thank you, Abigail said, accepting the certified copy. We're planning significant improvements to the property in the coming months. Indeed. Simmons's gaze was curious, but not unfriendly. Town could use more enterprise. Blacksmithing brings trade. From the clerk's office, Abigail proceeded to Parker's general store, where she found the widow inventorying new stock just arrived by freight wagon. After purchasing supplies for the cabin, Abigail broached the subject of Miranda's invitation. "Well now," Widow Parker said, eyes twinkling, "Miranda Reynolds inviting you to her precious Saturday soiree. That's rich." She chuckled softly. "Of course I'll accompany you, child. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Mr. Sullivan suggested you might be willing. Did he now? Man's smarter than he lets on." The widow leaned forward conspiratorially. "Miranda's been trying to secure Ezra's attention since she arrived from Boston. Can't fathom why a man of means and ability would choose solitude over her company." "Mr. Sullivan has means." This detail surprised Abigail, who had assumed his resources were limited. "Blacksmithing pays well when you're the best for 50 miles, and Ezra lives simply, saves his earnings." Widow Parker's shrewd eyes studied Abigail. "Your partnership is strictly business, I assume?" "Absolutely," Abigail confirmed, perhaps too quickly. "We each contribute different assets to the enterprise." The widow's non-committal sound suggested she had her own opinions on the matter. "Well, I'll pick you up at 4 o'clock Saturday. Wear your best dress. Miranda sets great store by appearances." When Abigail returned to the cabin, she found Sullivan had been busy in her absence. The porch floorboards had been replaced, the leaning roof support straightened, and a new door hung on proper hinges. The improvements transformed the cabin's appearance from neglected to rustic, but intentional. "You've been industrious," she observed, dismounting. "Partnership agreement official?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Recorded and certified?" She handed him his copy of the document. "And Widow Parker has agreed to accompany me to Miranda's gathering." Sullivan nodded approval. "Sarah's a good ally. Knows everyone's secrets, holds her own counsel. She mentioned you have means," Abigail said, watching his reaction. "I had assumed your financial situation was more constrained." A flicker of something, embarrassment perhaps, crossed his face. "Make a decent living. No expensive habits." "You might have mentioned that when I proposed financial collaboration." Sullivan met her gaze directly. "My contributions still mostly labor and knowledge. Your capital secured the property when mine couldn't." The honesty in his response diffused her momentary irritation. If Sullivan had resources he hadn't disclosed, he clearly didn't consider them relevant to their arrangement. His focus remained practical rather than financial. "Fair enough," she conceded. "What's next on our project list?" "Foundation for the forge. Need to order a brick from Helena, but we can prepare the site." He gestured toward the creek. "Thought we might walk the location, identify any challenges before we start digging." As they walked the property together, discussing technical details and construction timelines, Abigail became aware of a subtle shift in their interaction. The initial wariness that had characterized their early encounters had given way to something more comfortable. Not quite friendship, but a growing mutual respect built on shared purpose. Sullivan's knowledge of construction and metallurgy impressed her, while he seemed to appreciate her quick grasp of business considerations and supply logistics. They complemented each other in ways neither had anticipated when forming their partnership. "This might actually work," Sullivan said as they marked the forge's perimeter with wooden stakes. "Did you doubt it would?" Abigail asked. "Partnerships are complicated, business or otherwise." Something in his tone suggested personal experience. With failure in that realm, they require clear communication and shared objectives, she agreed. "Fortunately, we seem capable of both." Sullivan glanced at her, an unreadable expression in his grey eyes. "Time will tell." As they walked back toward the cabin in the fading light, Abigail reflected on the remarkable turn her life had taken in just a few short weeks. From desperate mail-order bride to business partner with a one-armed blacksmith, developing a property that had never belonged to the man she'd traveled west to marry. The deception that had brought her to Liberty Creek now seemed almost providential, rather than malicious. Without Thomas Fletcher's lies, she would never have discovered this place or met Ezra Sullivan. She would never have found the courage to use her inheritance to build something truly her own. "Penny for your thoughts," Sullivan said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I was thinking about unexpected journeys," she replied, "and how sometimes the wrong path leads to exactly where you're meant to be." Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Montana summer stretching into September with golden light and lingering heat. Abigail stood before the small mirror in her cabin, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep blue silk with modest bustle and lace trim at the cuffs. It was the only truly fashionable garment she had brought from Philadelphia, saved for special occasions that she hadn't expected to encounter in the frontier wilderness. Her hair, usually constrained in a practical bun during workdays, had been arranged in a more becoming style, with soft curls framing her face. The transformation from frontier homesteader to society lady was remarkable, even to her own eyes. "No one would. Guess you've been digging garden beds and hauling water," she murmured to her reflection. A knock at the door announced Widow Parker's arrival. The older woman had outdone herself as well, wearing a plum-colored dress of good quality, though its styling dated back several years. Her grey hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure, topped with a small hat adorned with silk violets. "My word," the widow exclaimed, taking in Abigail's appearance. "You'll certainly give Miranda something to worry about tonight." "That's not my intention," Abigail protested as they settled into the widow's buggy. "I merely wish to observe and understand the community dynamics," Widow Parker chuckled. "Child, your mere existence has already disrupted those dynamics. Arriving as a mail-order bride, staying despite the deception, partnering with Ezra Sullivan, you've given Liberty Creek more to gossip about than the last 3 years combined." The 5-mile journey passed quickly as the widow provided background on the expected guests at Miranda's gathering. The guest list included Lawrence Preston and his wife Eunice, Dr. James Howard and his spinster sister Lucinda, Harold Winters, owner of the Sawmill and Timber Company, Judge Wesley Thompson and his much younger wife Beatrice, and several other prominent citizens. "Miranda cultivates connections with anyone possessing influence or wealth," Widow Parker explained. "Her boarding house caters to traveling businessmen, giving her access to information from across the territory. Combined with Lawrence Preston's banking connections, they're a formidable alliance." "What exactly are they trying to achieve?" Abigail asked. "Growth, progress, prosperity, all admirable goals on the surface, but their methods can be questionable. The widow's expression turned serious. Preston's been buying land and water rights throughout the county. Anyone who refuses to sell finds their loan suddenly called due or their timber contracts cancelled. And Miranda? She provides social legitimacy to his business maneuvers. Her gatherings aren't just social occasions. They're where alliances form and deals are struck. Having refused to sell your property, you and Ezra represent an obstacle to their plans. Miranda's boarding house proved impressive by frontier standards, a two-story structure with wraparound porch and freshly painted trim. Gas lamps illuminated the entrance, and through the windows Abigail glimpsed elegant furnishings that would not have looked out of place in an eastern city. Their hostess greeted them at the door, her surprise at Widow Parker's presence barely concealed behind a practiced smile. "Sarah, what an unexpected pleasure. I didn't realize you and Miss Thornton were acquainted." "Oh, Abigail and I have become fast friends," the widow replied cheerfully. "When she mentioned your kind invitation, I simply had to accompany her. Her social event in Liberty Creek, so important to make the right impression." Miranda's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Please come in. Everyone is eager to meet our newest resident." The gathering was already underway in a spacious parlor, decorated with an eclectic mix of frontier practicality and Eastern refinement. About 20 guests mingled, the men in their best suits, the women in dresses that represented the community's varying degrees of prosperity and access to current fashions. Lawrence Preston approached immediately, his wife Eunice in tow. "Miss Thornton, what a delightful surprise. I'd heard you were focusing on rural improvements." His emphasis suggested manual labor was beneath someone of her background. "The property is coming along nicely," Abigail replied pleasantly. "Mr. Sullivan and I have made significant progress on the foundation for the new forge." Preston's expression cooled at Sullivan's name. "Indeed, I wasn't aware blacksmithing was among your interests." "I have many interests, Mr. Preston. Business, ventures with growth potential particularly appeal to me." Eunice Preston, a thin woman with nervous features, touched her husband's arm. "Lawrence, you promised to introduce Miss Thornton to Judge Thompson." "Of course, my dear." Preston's professional smile returned. "Miss Thornton, if you'll excuse us. Please, enjoy the gathering." As the evening progressed, Abigail was introduced to Liberty Creek's prominent citizens. Most seemed genuinely curious about the newcomer from Philadelphia, though their questions often carried subtle probing for information about her background, means, and intentions regarding the Pearson property. Judge Thompson, a stern-faced man with bushy side whiskers, was particularly direct. "Preston tells me you've entered a business partnership with Sullivan. Unusual arrangement for a lady of your upbringing. The frontier demands practical solutions. Judge Thompson, Mr. Sullivan contributes skills I lack while I provide resources he needs." Resources. The judge's expression suggested he was filing away this confirmation of her financial capacity. "Montana Territory offers abundant opportunities for those with capital and vision. Preston's development initiatives have brought considerable progress to Liberty Creek." "Progress means different things to different people," Abigail observed. Carefully, the judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed it does. Some prefer stagnation to growth, individual interests to community benefit." Widow Parker appeared at Abigail's elbow, her timing impeccable. "Judge Thompson, I believe your wife is looking for you. Something about the music program." After he departed, the widow leaned close. "Thompson's in Preston's pocket. Any legal disputes regarding water rights or property boundaries would go before his bench." "Not very encouraging for impartial justice," Abigail murmured. "Welcome to frontier law, my dear. Now come meet Harold Winters. His timber company controls most of the lumber supply in the county, essential knowledge for your rebuilding projects." Harold Winters proved to be a bluff, hearty man in his 50s, with calloused hands that suggested he hadn't always directed operations from behind a desk. His assessment of Abigail was refreshingly straightforward. "Sullivan's a good man," he said after hearing of their partnership. "Best blacksmith in 3 counties. Designed a logging hook that saved my men countless hours. If he vouches for you, that's good enough for me." "We've found our skills complement each other well," Abigail said. Winters nodded approvingly. "Practical partnerships outlast romantic notions any day. You'll need timber for that forge. Come by my office next week. I'll make sure you get fair prices." This unexpected support from a prominent businessman boosted Abigail's confidence. Not everyone in Liberty Creek belonged to Preston and Miranda's sphere of influence. The evening's subtle tensions came to a head during dinner, served at a long table, accommodating all 20 guests. Abigail found herself seated between Dr. Howard and Miranda's brother, Edward Reynolds, who had arrived late from Helena. Edward Reynolds bore a striking resemblance to his sister, the same blonde hair and blue eyes, but his manner lacked her calculated charm. There was something restless about him, his gaze constantly moving, assessing, as though searching for advantage or escape. "Philadelphia, was it?" he asked as soup was served. "Textile merchants there are struggling since the economic panic. Too much competition from New England mills." The specific reference to textiles, her father's business, sent a chill through Abigail. "I'm afraid I know little about the industry," she lied smoothly. "My interests were more domestic than commercial." Reynolds smiled, revealing 2 perfect teeth. "Curious, a mutual acquaintance mentioned your family's connection to Thornton Textiles." The room seemed to still be around her, though conversation continued unabated. "You must be mistaken," Abigail said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Thornton is not an uncommon name." "Perhaps." His smile remained fixed. "Victor Caldwell seemed quite certain when we discussed Philadelphia investments last month in Helena. Victor Caldwell." The name struck Abigail like a physical blow. Her father's business partner had somehow traced her to Montana territory. "Mr. Caldwell's certainty exceeds his knowledge," she managed, though her appetite had vanished. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She rose, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Dr. Howard was about to describe the medical challenges of frontier practice. The doctor, startled at being drawn into conversation so abruptly, nevertheless responded with professional composure, allowing Abigail to steer the discussion away from Philadelphia connections. But the damage was done. Edward Reynolds's knowing smirk suggested he had confirmed whatever suspicions he harbored. As dinner concluded and guests moved to the parlor for music and further conversation, Abigail found a moment to speak privately. "With Widow Parker, I need to leave," she whispered urgently. "Edward Reynolds has connections to someone from my past, someone I'd prefer not to encounter again." The widow's shrewd eyes assessed her pale face. "Say no more. I'll make our excuses." They departed shortly thereafter, pleading a headache on Abigail's part. Miranda's farewell was coolly polite, while Edward Reynolds watched with undisguised interest as they climbed into the widow's buggy. "That young man recognized you," Widow Parker observed as they drove away. "Or thinks he did." "It's complicated," Abigail said, unwilling to elaborate. "It always is." The widow clucked to her horse. "Whatever you're running from, child, it appears to have found you." The 5-mile journey back to the cabin seemed interminable, Abigail's mind racing with implications. If Victor Caldwell knew her whereabouts, her fragile new beginning was at risk. He would stop at nothing to reclaim what he believed was rightfully her father's business, and by extension her. "Would you mind terribly if we stopped at Mr. Sullivan's forge?" she asked suddenly. "I need to consult with him about this development." Widow Parker raised an eyebrow, but adjusted their course without comment. Sullivan's forge lay 3 miles west of the Pearson property, a sturdy stone building with attached workshop and small cabin. Light glowed from the windows, despite the Late hour. Sullivan answered their knock immediately, his surprise at the unexpected visitors evident in his expression. He wore a simple shirt with sleeves rolled up, work trousers, and a leather apron stained with soot and metal filings. Abigail? Sarah? His gaze took in their formal attire with confusion. Something wrong? I'm afraid there might be, Abigail said. May we come in? Sullivan's living quarters were as spare and functional as the man himself, a single room with simple furniture, bookshelves lined with technical volumes and historical texts, and a drafting table covered with designs for specialized tools. The space was meticulously organized, everything in its place, accessible to a man working with one hand. Miranda's gathering took an unexpected turn, Abigail explained once they were seated. Her brother Edward mentioned a connection to someone from my Philadelphia past, someone who would have reason to pursue me. Sullivan's expression grew serious. The business partner you mentioned? The one who expected to acquire your father's company through marriage? Victor Caldwell, yes. Abigail hesitated, then decided complete honesty was necessary. What I didn't explain fully is that my father legally transferred ownership of Thornton Textiles to me before his death. Victor doesn't know this. He believes he can claim the company by marrying me, as my father had verbally promised him a partnership expansion. And this business, is it valuable? Widow Parker asked, her practical mind going straight to essentials. Very. Annual revenues exceeding $50,000. 3 factory buildings, contracts with major retailers throughout the Northeast. Abigail met Sullivan's gaze directly. My inheritance isn't just cash, Ezra. It's controlling interest in one of Philadelphia's largest textile manufacturers. Sullivan absorbed this information with characteristic stillness. That's why you kept your financial situation private, not just proper caution for a woman traveling alone. I needed to establish myself independently, prove I could survive without relying on my father's name or fortune. Abigail's voice strengthened with conviction, and I needed to ensure that anyone who chose to associate with me did so for reasons beyond financial advantage. Like a business partner, Sullivan said, quietly. Or a husband, Widow Parker added, her shrewd gaze moving between them. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken when Sullivan rose and moved to the small stove in the corner. Coffee? He offered, practical as always. While he prepared the beverage, Abigail explained Edward Reynolds's comments and her fears that Victor Caldwell might have traced her to Liberty Creek. If he comes, he'll bring legal documents, possibly forged, claiming rights to the business, she concluded. He's not above manipulation or intimidation to get what he wants. Does he have any legitimate claim? Sullivan asked, serving coffee in simple ceramic mugs. None whatsoever. My father's will was properly executed and witnessed. The business transfer was legally recorded before his death. Abigail's hands tightened around her mug. But Victor has connections in Philadelphia's legal community, and I've been gone for months, which could be construed as abandonment of business interests. He'd need jurisdiction here to enforce any Eastern claims, Widow Parker pointed out. Which brings us back to Judge Thompson, Sullivan said grimly. If Preston's involved, Thompson would grant whatever ruling they wanted. The implications settled heavily on all three. If Preston allied with Caldwell, Abigail could lose not only her inheritance, but also her investment in the Pearson property. We need to establish clear legal protection for your holdings, Sullivan said after a thoughtful silence. Separate your personal assets from our partnership. Ensure that even if Caldwell makes claims against your inheritance, the property remains secure. There's an honest lawyer in Helena, Widow Parker suggested. Samuel Merriweather. Helped my late husband with mining claims. Doesn't bow to Preston's influence. I should go to Helena immediately, Abigail said. before Edward Reynolds reports back to Caldwell. Not alone, Sullivan stated firmly. Reynolds already suspects your identity. If word reaches Preston before you've secured legal protection, he could move against the property directly. Ezra's right, the widow agreed. You two should travel together tomorrow. I'll watch the property while you're gone. Abigail nodded, recognizing the wisdom in their counsel, but another concern pressed on her conscience. Ezra, there's something else you should know. She met his gaze directly. The funds I've contributed to our partnership. They're substantial, but they represent only a fraction of my total inheritance. Sullivan's expression remained unreadable. I assumed as much. You're not concerned that I withheld the full extent of my financial situation? You had good reason for caution. His grey eyes held hers steadily. Question is, what happens now that the secret's out? It was the crux of the matter, how her revealed wealth might change their carefully balanced partnership. Would Sullivan see her differently now? Would he resent her earlier reticence, or worse, begin calculating his own potential gain? Nothing changes regarding our agreement, she said firmly. The partnership stands as written. My other assets remain separate from our joint enterprise. Sullivan nodded once, accepting her decision without further comment. But something had shifted between them, an equilibrium disturbed by revealed truths and external threats. As they prepared to leave, Sullivan walked them to the widow's buggy. Pack whatever you need for Helena, he told Abigail. I'll be at the cabin at dawn. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding. His expression softened slightly. Secrets have reasons, Abigail. I've got a few myself. The quiet admission that he too had parts of his life kept deliberately private offered unexpected comfort. Whatever challenges they faced, they would confront them with mutual understanding of the complexities that had shaped their individual paths. As the widow's buggy pulled away, Abigail glanced back at Sullivan standing in the doorway of his forge, the light behind him casting his one-armed silhouette against the night. A man of contradictions, physically diminished yet remarkably capable, taciturn yet insightful, seemingly solitary yet willing to involve himself in her complicated situation. He's a good man, Widow Parker said, following Abigail's gaze. Whether or not that's relevant to your partnership is entirely your business. Abigail turned forward again, her thoughts in turmoil. The secure foundation she had begun to build in Montana territory now seemed precarious, threatened by connections to a past she had hoped to leave behind. Victor Caldwell's potential arrival represented not just a claim against her inheritance, but a challenge to the independence she had fought so hard to establish. And beyond the immediate threat lay deeper questions about her future with Sullivan. Their partnership had begun as a pragmatic business arrangement, but something more complex was developing, a connection based on mutual respect and shared purpose that defied simple definition. As the cabin came into view, Abigail squared her, shoulders, determination replacing uncertainty. Whatever challenges awaited in Helena, whatever threats Caldwell might pose, she would not surrender the new life she had begun to build. Not to Victor's manipulations, not to Preston's schemes, not to the conventions that sought to limit her choices. She had come too far and discovered too much strength within herself to retreat now. The journey to Helena took 2 full days. Ezra, Sullivan's wagon rolling steadily across terrain that alternated between rolling grasslands and pine-covered hills. They traveled in companionable silence for long stretches, each lost in private thoughts about the challenges that awaited them. Helena itself came as a shock to Abigail after weeks in Liberty Creek. Though still small by Eastern standards, the territorial capital boasted proper streets, substantial brick buildings, and the bustling activity of a growing commercial center. Sullivan guided the wagon expertly through traffic to a modest hotel near the courthouse. "We'll secure rooms here," he said, setting the brake. Then find Merriweather's office before business hours end. Samuel Merriweather proved to be exactly as Widow Parker had described, a sharp-minded attorney with incisive intelligence and no patience for political maneuvering. His office occupied the second floor of a brick building on Helena's main street, its furnishings simple but of good quality. Sarah Parker's recommendation carries weight, the lawyer said after hearing their names. How can I assist you? Abigail explained her situation with careful precision. Her inheritance, Victor Caldwell's potential claims, the partnership with Sullivan, and their concerns about Lawrence Preston's influence in Liberty Creek. Merriweather listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When she finished, he removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. You have several distinct legal matters requiring attention, he said. First, securing your Eastern inheritance against fraudulent claims. Second, protecting your partnership property from being entangled in any personal lawsuits. Third, establishing clear water rights documentation for the Pearson land. Can all this be accomplished quickly? Abigail asked. I'll need to draft several documents, file certified copies with both territorial and federal authorities. 2 days, perhaps 3. He replaced his spectacles. May I ask why Mr. Sullivan is party to these proceedings? The inheritance matter seems separate from your business partnership. Sullivan, who had remained characteristically quiet during Abigail's explanation, met the lawyer's gaze directly. Miss Thornton's welfare concerns me beyond business interests. Something in his tone caused Merriweather to study them both more closely. After a moment he nodded. I see. That adds certain considerations to our legal strategy. Over the next 3 days, they worked methodically through the complex legal requirements. Abigail provided documentation of her inheritance, including her father's will and the business transfer papers she had brought from Philadelphia. Sullivan contributed precise descriptions of the Pearson property's boundaries and water access points, critical for establishing their rights against Preston's potential claims. Merriweather proved remarkably efficient, drafting protective trusts, filing property claims, and establishing legal barriers that would make it difficult for either Caldwell or Preston to challenge their respective holdings. He also suggested a modified partnership agreement that would protect their joint property from individual claims against either partner. Sign here, he directed on the third afternoon, presenting the final documents for their signatures. These establish that the Pearson property is held in a separate trust, distinct from your personal assets, Miss Thornton. Even if Mr. Caldwell were to pursue claims against your inheritance, this land and business would remain protected. As they affixed their signatures to the various papers, Abigail felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The legal barriers might not prevent Caldwell from appearing in Liberty Creek, but they would severely limit his ability to threaten her new life. There's one additional matter, Merriweather said, as they prepared to leave. I've taken the liberty of requesting a federal land survey of the creek that runs through your property. Water rights in Montana territory are increasingly contentious, and having official documentation will strengthen your position against any future challenges. That's foresighted, Sullivan commented. Preston's been accumulating water access throughout the county. Lawrence Preston has ambitions beyond Liberty Creek, Merriweather observed. His banking connections extend to Helena and beyond, but federal water rights supersede territorial claims. Remember that if conflicts arise. They departed Helena the following morning, the wagon loaded with supplies for the forge construction, as well as the secured legal documents. The return journey seemed faster somehow, perhaps because a significant burden had been lifted from Abigail's concerns. On their second evening on the trail, camped beside a small stream with a cook fire burning cheerfully, Sullivan finally broached the subject they had both been carefully avoiding. Merriweather assumed we had personal interests, "Beyond business," he said, pouring coffee into tin cups. "Made me realize we've never discussed what happens if Caldwell actually appears in Liberty Creek." Abigail accepted the coffee, warming her hands around the cup. "I've been thinking about that. The legal protections are in place, but confrontation seems inevitable. Man travels 2,000 miles in pursuit. He's not easily discouraged by legal papers." Sullivan's expression was thoughtful in the firelight. "What's your strategy?" "Direct confrontation. I won't hide behind documents or lawyers when he arrives. I'll face him with the truth, that I left Philadelphia deliberately, that I've established a new life, and that his expectations regarding my father's business were based on assumptions, not legal agreements." Sullivan nodded slowly. "Straightforward approach. Suits you. But there's another consideration." Abigail met his gaze across the fire. "Caldwell isn't just pursuing business interests. He believes marriage to me would secure his social position in Philadelphia society. Even with legal barriers to claiming my inheritance, he might persist in that goal." "Unless that option was no longer available," Sullivan said quietly. The implication hung in the air between them. A married woman could not be courted or claimed by another man, regardless of prior expectations or arrangements. "Ezra," Abigail began carefully, "if you're suggesting what I think you are—" "Not suggesting anything," he interrupted, his tone neutral. "Just noting possibilities." The conversation lapsed into silence, both aware they had approached a boundary in their relationship that neither was quite ready to cross. Their partnership had evolved beyond mere business, but defining what existed between them remained elusive. They reached the Pearson property late the next afternoon to find Widow Parker waiting with surprising news. "Victor Caldwell arrived in Liberty Creek yesterday," she announced without preamble. "He's staying at Miranda's boarding house, making inquiries about you with anyone who'll listen." Abigail's heart pounded, though she had expected this development. "Has he come to the property?" "Not yet, but Preston's been seen riding with him. They're clearly coordinating strategy." The widow's expression was grave. "They've scheduled a meeting with Judge Thompson for tomorrow morning. Something about Eastern business interests requiring territorial legal recognition." Sullivan's expression hardened. "Moving faster than we anticipated. Good thing Merriweather filed those federal papers." "What should we expect?" Abigail asked, trying to envision Caldwell's likely approach. "He'll attempt to establish legal standing with Thompson first," Sullivan reasoned. "Then probably appear here with some form of court order demanding recognition of his claims." "We should prepare a united response," Abigail said, determination replacing anxiety. "I won't be intimidated in my own home." The word home resonated more deeply than she had intended. This burned homestead, this remote Montana property she had never planned to visit, had become her home in every meaningful sense. She would defend it accordingly. Morning brought activity to the property much earlier than anticipated. Sullivan arrived before dawn to help fortify the cabin's damaged window frames and reinforce the door, precautions against unwanted entry rather than weather concerns. By sunrise, they had established a clear defensive position without creating an appearance of hostility. Widow Parker arrived mid-morning with fresh information. Caldwell presented documents to Judge Thompson claiming abandonment of business, interests and breach of family commitment. Thompson has granted him temporary territorial recognition of potential claims pending full hearing. "As expected," Sullivan said grimly. "They'll be here soon." The prediction proved accurate. Just before noon, 2 buggies approached the property, Lawrence Preston driving one, with Victor Caldwell beside him, while Miranda Reynolds occupied the second with her brother Edward and Judge Thompson. Abigail stood on the newly repaired porch, Sullivan slightly behind her, a united front against the approaching delegation. She had dressed carefully in her blue silk, her hair arranged as it might have been for a Philadelphia social call, projecting confidence and self-possession. Victor Caldwell cut an impressive figure as he descended from Preston's buggy. Tall, handsome in the conventional sense, impeccably dressed in an Eastern suit that looked absurdly formal against the Montana landscape. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his clean-shaven face displaying the arrogant confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Abigail," he called, approaching the porch. "What a remote location for our reunion. When your letter mentioned Montana Territory, I hardly expected such rustic circumstances." She had sent no letter, which meant Edward Reynolds had fabricated communication to lure Caldwell west. The deception confirmed Preston's involvement extended beyond mere opportunity. "Victor," she replied coolly, "you've traveled a long way unnecessarily. As the legal documents filed in Helena yesterday confirm, my affairs in Montana Territory are entirely separate from Philadelphia interests." Caldwell's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "My dear, confusion about business matters is perfectly understandable. Your father's passing left many arrangements incomplete. I've simply come to help clarify your position and escort you home where you belong." "My position is perfectly clear," Abigail stated firmly. "I am the legal owner of Thornton Textiles, as documented in my father's will and business transfer filings. I am also a partial owner of this property through a separate business partnership. Neither are subject to your claims or expectations." Preston stepped forward, his expression a mask of professional concern. "Miss Thornton, Mr. Caldwell has presented compelling documentation regarding verbal agreements with your late father. Judge Thompson has acknowledged potential merit in these claims." "Verbal agreements don't supersede legal documents," Sullivan said, speaking for the first time, "which Mr. Merriweather has filed with both territorial and federal authorities." Judge Thompson, who had remained by Miranda's buggy, frowned at this mention of federal jurisdiction. "Merriweather has no standing in Liberty Creek matters." "He does when water rights and cross-territorial business interests are involved," Sullivan countered. "Federal filings take precedence over territorial rulings." This information clearly surprised Preston, whose confident expression wavered momentarily. But Caldwell remained focused on Abigail, seemingly unconcerned with legal technicalities. "Abigail, whatever game you're playing has gone far enough." His tone hardened, the pleasant facade cracking. "Your place is in Philadelphia, managing your father's household and supporting the business through proper channels, namely, marriage to his chosen successor." "My father chose me as his successor," Abigail replied. "The business operates under my direction, through managers I appointed before departing. As for marriage, that was your assumption, never my father's explicit wish nor my intention." Caldwell's gaze shifted to Sullivan, noting his position near Abigail, the protective stance, the missing left arm. Something like disdain flickered across his features. "I see you found something interesting, companionship in your frontier adventure. But surely you don't intend to waste your education and breeding in this wilderness. Philadelphia society awaits your return. Your father's legacy demands proper stewardship." "My father's legacy is being preserved exactly as he intended." Abigail stepped forward, her voice strengthening. "Jonathan Thornton wanted his daughter to have independence and choice, the very things you sought to deny me through manipulation and false claims." Miranda Reynolds, who had remained a silent observer until now, descended from her buggy with graceful determination. "Miss Thornton, perhaps we could discuss this matter more comfortably at my boarding house. These emotional confrontations rarely lead to satisfactory resolutions." "There's nothing to discuss," Abigail stated firmly. "My legal position is established. My personal choices are made. Mr. Caldwell has no claim on either my business or my future. Caldwell's facade of civility crumbled completely. This is absurd. You've been manipulated by these frontier opportunists. He gestured dismissively toward Sullivan. A crippled blacksmith and a burned homestead instead of Philadelphia. Society and a thriving business partnership. Your father would be appalled at such poor judgment. Something in his tone, the naked contempt, the dismissal of Sullivan based solely on his disability, ignited Abigail's anger into cold, focused fury. My father would recognize Ezra Sullivan's worth in an instant, she said, her voice cutting like steel. A man who rebuilt his life after sacrifice, in service to his country. A man who creates rather than manipulates, who offers partnership rather than control, who sees me as a person rather than property to be acquired. Sullivan moved forward to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Mr. Caldwell, your claims have no legal standing here. The documents filed in Helena establish Miss Thornton's independent ownership of both her inherited business and this property. Any attempt to pursue these matters further will result in federal intervention regarding cross-territorial commerce regulations. Preston, recognizing the shift in legal leverage, placed a restraining hand on Caldwell's arm. Perhaps we should review the Helena filings before proceeding further. I don't need to review anything, Caldwell snapped, shaking Preston's hand. Abigail, this is your final opportunity to return to Philadelphia with your dignity and position intact. Refuse, and I'll be forced to pursue full legal remedies, including public revelation of your unorthodox living arrangements. The threat, attempting to use social pressure where legal means failed, revealed the true nature of Caldwell's character. Abigail's last doubts about her decision to leave Philadelphia evaporated. My living arrangements are no concern of yours, she said calmly. But since you raised the issue of propriety, you should know that Mr. Sullivan and I are engaged to be married. Our partnership extends beyond business interests. The declaration, made without prior discussion or agreement, hung in the air between them. Sullivan's expression betrayed momentary surprise before settling into impassive support of her claim. Engaged, Miranda echoed, her calculating gaze moving between them. How remarkably convenient and entirely predictable, Widow Parker added cheerfully, joining them on the porch. Anyone with eyes could see where this partnership was headed. I've already spoken with Reverend Davis about October availability at the church. Caldwell stared at Abigail with naked disbelief. You can't possibly be serious. This one-armed frontier laborer instead of a man who values control over connection, who sees marriage as a business acquisition rather than a partnership of equals. Abigail's smile held genuine warmth as she turned toward Sullivan. Yes, I am entirely serious. Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, deeper than words, a recognition of truth within the tactical deception. Sullivan's grey eyes held questions alongside support, but his voice was steady when he addressed the unwelcome visitors. You've heard of Miss Thornton's position. I suggest you respect her wishes and depart. Judge Thompson cleared his throat uncomfortably. An engagement changes certain legal considerations regarding Mrs. Thornton's independence of action. Perhaps we should adjourn to review these developments. An excellent suggestion, Preston agreed quickly, recognizing their position had weakened considerably. Victor, we should consult privately before proceeding. Caldwell stood rigidly, his handsome features contorted with angry disbelief. This charade doesn't alter the facts, Abigail. Your father intended— My father intended for my happiness and independence, she interrupted with finality. I found both here. Good day, Victor. The delegation departed in obvious disarray, their unified front fractured by this unexpected development. As the buggies disappeared down the track, Widow Parker chuckled softly. "Well played, my dear. Though perhaps warning your fiancé might have been considerate." Abigail turned to Sullivan, suddenly uncertain. "Ezra, I apologize for the presumption. It seemed the most effective counter to Caldwell's threats." His expression remained unreadable for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, a smile transformed his bearded face. Effective strategy, though as proposals go, it lacked certain traditional elements. Relief washed through her, followed by something deeper. The circumstances were hardly traditional. "Nothing about us has been," he agreed, his voice softening. "From a burned cabin to business partnership, to this." "To what exactly?" she asked, needing clarity despite Widow Parker's interested presence. Sullivan considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "To a proposal that requires proper response. If you meant what you said, beyond tactical advantage, I accept." The simple declaration, delivered without flowery sentiments or grand gestures, suited him perfectly. It also answered the question she hadn't quite dared to ask, whether the engagement fiction might contain elements of genuine intention. "I meant it," Abigail confirmed softly, "though I'd planned a more conventional approach to the subject." Widow Parker snorted delicately. "Conventional is highly overrated. Now, shall we discuss those October wedding arrangements I mentioned? Reverend Davis will need adequate notice." Later, after the widow departed with promises to spread news of their engagement throughout Liberty Creek, Abigail and Sullivan sat on the porch watching sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. The day's confrontation had changed everything, accelerating developments neither had anticipated when forming their initial partnership. "They'll challenge the engagement," Sullivan said practically. "Caldwell won't surrender easily." "No, but his position is significantly weakened, and once we're actually married, his claims become legally irrelevant." Abigail turned to study his profile. "If that's still your intention, now that the immediate threat has passed," Sullivan met her gaze directly. "My intentions haven't changed, but I want you certain, Abigail, not reacting to Caldwell or seeking security through marriage. Exactly what you left Philadelphia to avoid." The insight demonstrated how thoroughly he understood her journey. "This is different," she said softly. "I'm choosing from strength, not fear. I'm selecting a partner who values my independence rather than seeking to control it." He nodded, accepting her assessment. "Partnership in all things, then." "In all things," she agreed, "though I suspect we'll interpret that differently at times." A smile touched his lips. "Likely, building something that lasts requires occasional disagreement, tests the foundation, strengthens the structure." The blacksmith's metaphor perfectly captured their relationship's evolution. They had begun by literally rebuilding a burned homestead. Along the way, they had constructed something less tangible but more valuable, a connection based on mutual respect, complementary strengths, and shared purpose. As twilight deepened toward night, Abigail reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. Thomas Fletcher's deception had led her not to the marriage of convenience she had reluctantly sought, but to a partnership far more meaningful than she could have imagined. The burned homestead was gradually transforming. Under their combined efforts, new forge foundation laid, cabin repairs completed, garden producing its first harvest. Similarly, both she and Sullivan had undergone transformations less visible but more profound, each finding in the other something they hadn't realized they needed. "What are you thinking?" Sullivan asked, his voice gentle in the gathering darkness. "That," Sometimes life's greatest disappointments lead to its most unexpected blessings, she replied. That arriving at a burned homestead instead of a welcoming husband turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me. His hand found hers in the darkness, strong fingers intertwining with her more delicate ones. No words were necessary as they sat together, watching stars emerge above the Montana landscape that had become their shared home. The mail-order bride with a secret fortune and the one-armed blacksmith had found in each other not what they had been seeking, but what they truly needed, the courage to build something authentic from the ashes of what might have been. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass. These up, just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.